WISC TV now presents For the Record.
A conversation with Madison Mayor Paul Soglin is next on For the Record. Thanks for joining us. I'm Neil Heinen. For our last show of the year, who better to recap 2017 and look ahead to the new year than Madison's Mayor Paul Soglin. How was your year?
It was a pretty good year,
Huh?
and especially the last half of the year has been far better than the first.
I mean, neither one of us has ever worked in an environment quite like this year.
Well, it's been a challenge, both at the state and the federal level.
Right.
Sort of the philosophy that's underpinned Madison, which is wise use of tax dollars. We invest. That in turn stimulates the private sector, and that gets us better schools, safer neighborhoods, a cleaner environment, more housing, and all that good stuff that we like. And we've got a federal and a state administration which has the exact opposite view, which is the whole trickle down, cut taxes, and or give away mammoth tax breaks, as was the case with Foxconn. It's a challenge, particularly when you put the cloud of state preemption over us, where they are taking away so much of our power and authority on just a monthly basis.
Did you sense any from the citizens, Paul? Responding to what you would do, what your office would do. Did you sense any greater, the divisiveness, the anger, the distrust of institutions that has characterized a lot of the conversation in the last year?
Well, it's interesting. If we go back to Jimmy Carter, when he was elected president in '76, he, as a Democrat, surprisingly, was one of the people who said, I'm the outsider, I'm coming in, I'm going to shake things up, and in effect played off of people's mistrust of government. Of course, he was followed by Ronald Reagan, who really exploited it, and it just gets worse and worse as the decades go on. Well, now the White House, we've got a president who's made it very clear in Donald Trump, he hates government. I mean, he was going to drain the swamp. But what he in turn has done is disappointed everyone. He's disappointed those of us who believe there's a role for government in improving everyone's lives, and he's disappointed his own people in that he didn't drain the swamp, but he's basically taken what federal resources are left and used those not for public purposes but for private gain. And that has really added to the cynicism. My message is just we have to keep moving forward in a positive manner. We have to keep going on. One of the things that really scared us about the tax bill, one of the few things that came out of it, I mean, here we were defensively. We've got to keep this program going. And what I'm referring to are the tax credits for affordable housing. Mm-hmm. That is one of the two pillars that's allowing us to move forward in creating our goal of 1,000 new units over 5 years. And if we'd lost that, it would have just been devastating, not just to Madison, but to larger, poorer cities around the country that are even more dependent on that federal role. But it was just an incredible fight, an incredible battle to preserve that kind of a program.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how cities have been cast in this whole conversation. There is an antipathy towards cities to some degree, although we've also seen cities struggle. Even cities who have tried very, very hard to be the places that we have all envisioned them to be, with disparities in housing, with disparities in income, and then disparities of culture.
If you look at the literature, and some of it goes back to Richard Florida and his work, it's coming out of the Brookings Institute, it's coming out of the Kauffman Foundation. If you look at what they're all saying, They're saying cities are where the innovation is taking place. Cities is where we are finding the solutions to these problems. It doesn't matter whether it's a city of 7 million or it's a city of 7,000. It's cities are where it's at. Well, unfortunately, I believe that's to be true. And the reason I say unfortunately is that those of us occupying the space in cities, whether it's in Superior or it's in Ripon or it's in Madison, we've got that honor by default because of the abandonment on the issues of social justice, of solving the housing problem, of creating great jobs.
At the state and federal
The
levels.
federal and state governments have disappeared. They're not players. They're not the kinds of laboratories of innovation that Wisconsin was 100 years ago.
Under the guise of lowering taxes, saving money.
Yeah. But 100 years ago, you looked here in Wisconsin, child labor laws, the seeds of Social Security, workers' compensation, all that. Well, now, like I said, the state and the federal government have abandoned that role, and we're scrambling to fill the vacuum and to be innovative and to be responsive to the new technology, while at the same time, the states are preempting us in terms of our ability to regulate and to manage. For example, right now, we have a program of rotating and trying to inspect all rental properties every 7 years. That keeps the quality of housing up. It keeps it safe. This is something we've been doing at least since I've been in government, which goes back to the late 60s. There is a bill in the legislature now which basically preempts our ability to do building inspection. And if a city building inspector initiates the inspection, makes it a crime. In other words, the only time we're going to be able to do an inspection is if we get a call in from a resident on a complaint, and that's it. This is just craziness.
Right. We're going to talk more about the challenges. I also want to go back and talk a little bit more about the successes of 2017. We'll do that with Mayor Paul Soglin right after this. We wrap up 2017 on For the Record with a conversation with Madison Mayor Paul Soglin. And yes, we will talk about the race for governor before this half hour is over. But I want to go back just to have you highlight some of the things in 2017 that stood out for you, Paul, in terms of the city and how we might view that as successful.
Well, obviously, one of the big topics all year was the homicide rate. And on August 4th, we recorded our record homicide of the year, eclipsing 10. And since that date, we're now going on 5 months without a homicide. And I attribute that to two things. One is our efforts by the Madison Police Department, very intensive effort in August and in September to focus on that 0.1% of our community's population that, as I put it, prefers a gun to a job. The second thing is we launched our focused program in regards to a community-based effort to intercede in the shootings. So now when there is a shot taken at someone, we've got a team, not just law enforcement, but more importantly, citizens who work with the victim and the victim's associates, witnesses, the shooter and the shooter's associates. And we've done a number of things that, besides that, lessen tensions. We've made sure that funerals have gone off smoothly when there's been a fatality, things of that sort. What's key to all of this is a recognition that there's a small group of principally men who don't care about any of the long-term programming that we're doing. I have every confidence in the world that what we're doing in our Housing First program, in our job creation programs, both for teens and adults, in our work focused on health, particularly behavioral health, all that 10, 20 years is going to make a difference. The problem is for these 40, 60, 80 young men, that doesn't reach them. And we've got to first break down a barrier in regards to their estrangement and relationship to the rest of society and make it very clear. You guys got a choice. You can be productive and there's a place for you in the community, or you're going to prison. And I wish now that the program we initiated, which follows the shootings or the attempted murders, I wish we could have launched a program to get ahead of it. We know who these guys are. And I'd like us to be able to get out there now. Unfortunately, the council hasn't funded a program like that, but I'm not giving up.
Now, while we focus on this group that, as you say, is pretty well identified, are we doing any better at keeping new recruits, you know, people from seeing that as an option for them as well?
When I spoke with Professor David Kennedy from the John Jay School of Criminal Justice in New York, he made a point based on some of the work they did in Oakland, and it was basically this. If you were to round up everyone that they identified in Oakland and made them disappear from the community, whether it was through incarceration or whatever, would that have a long-term effect? And the answer is no, it will not. It will have a short-term effect, but long-term, in terms of the place itself, if you don't change the conditions, a younger generation is going to evolve and is going to buy into that same level of violence. That's why, as we say, you've got to deal with hot spots and hot people. So we've got an initiative coming up in February, a placemaking initiative, where we're hoping this is going to lead in terms of hot places to neighbors, nonprofits, taking greater control of their community, setting standards, and basically isolating those who do not accept the invitation to join the community.
Yep.
And then the hot people, looking at that 40, those 60, principally young men under the age of 40, who at this point in their life would rather have a gun than a job, and turning that around.
I got to ask, though, are there jobs available? Should that choice change?
The jobs are available.
Okay.
I mean, first, everything ranging from the summer youth employment, which has just exploded in the last 3 to 4 years, thankfully to not just what the city has done, but what the private sector has done, and then the full-time jobs. I mean, you can't open the newspapers anymore because that's not where the advertising necessarily is taking place, but go online, there are a ton of jobs, and then with what's going on at Exact Science, I mean, Exact Science is going to be hiring hundreds of people. Right. It is in walking distance to a large area of Madison where people are underemployed. Minimum wage, $15 an hour. Health insurance, retirement plan. And that's for starters.
And partnering with the Urban League.
And partnering with the Urban League and our efforts at the old Griffs to set up the programs for those who do need the job training.
I forgot the proximity of the new South Madison.
It's all within walking distance.
Yeah. And then before we go to break, Paul, just as I look at the same urban thinkers that you were talking about earlier, this idea of housing keeps coming up. We made a dent in 17, right?
We made a dent. I can't remember the exact numbers between what has been completed and is under construction. We're close to 500 new housing units. We've got another 300 in the pipeline where we're waiting for funding. And so we're within 150 or so of the number of units we set on our 5-year goal. And most of the people who are living in these units, their rent is anywhere from 30% of their income on down to basically close to nothing.
And but the strategy going forward is still to encourage more building, more development
Yes.
of units in the city.
Market units and subsidized units. It's, as they say, housing first. You've got issues of transportation, health care, child care, education, job training. None of that works until the individual, until the family is housed, permanently housed, not transitional housing, not temporary housing. That's the goal. Add to that housing stock, because we were, in 2011, of the 100 largest markets in the United States, we had the lowest vacancy rate. We had the tightest housing market in the country.
When we come back, let's take a look at issues that you're focusing on for 2018, and we'll do that with Mayor Paul Soglin right after this. The last for the record of 2017, and my guest is Madison Mayor Paul Soglin, and we have been talking about the year past, and now we'll look at the year ahead. Got any plans for 18?
Well, the biggest ones in terms of the city, meet that goal of that 1,000 units of affordable housing that we set out. Particularly reach, as we were talking in the last segment, those young men who are really isolated from the community and are tragically involved in some really violent activities. There's some environmental stuff. We've launched our initiative on the use of road salt because we're deeply concerned both about the lakes and the drinking water. And we're going to do an assessment as to how we do this winter now that we've got people certified in applying salt, whether it's in a parking lot or on your driveway if they're working for you doing that shoveling, or for the average person themselves. It may not sound like a big deal, but you've got to know how to distribute the salt. And that's something we're deeply concerned about because of the long-term environmental consequences and the fact that it is something that's going to be virtually impossible, in effect, to clean up, to get that salt out of the lakes, to get that salt from entering the drinking water.
All right, are you going to run for governor?
Oh, come on.
Yes, you are going to run for governor.
If nothing changes,
Yes.
My intention is to make a formal announcement in a couple of weeks.
This is a huge field, Paul. I mean, what's your strategy going in with a field like this?
Well, I think I've kind of hinted at it in the past, but we actually did some polling.
Right.
And the polling, bottom line, was very good.
Right.
Very good in terms of how I would do head-to-head running against Governor Walker. Here's what the problem is. Right now, at the federal level and at the national level, we've got what tax dollars we're paying mal-distributed. They are being misused. They're going for these enormous tax cuts for the rich. I mean, the so-called tax reform bill, I call it the tax fraud bill. That tax bill makes permanent the cuts that affect the wealthiest. But for all the rest of us who got the much smaller cuts, if at all, those are only temporary. You look here at Wisconsin at $2.2, $2.3 billion for Foxconn. And now, on top of that, the state is taking money that was going to be used for roads elsewhere in Wisconsin and shifting it to the Foxconn project. And so what's happening is what taxes we're paying are not going for the general good. And I think it's become evident to so many Wisconsinites that if you want a great community, you have to have a great school. I mean, how else are you going to convince your kids, live here, raise our grandchildren here? if you don't have great schools. And, you know, Wisconsin's transportation system was built by the dairy industry. Their influence in the legislature is what gave us that great network of town, county, and state highways. And it's falling into disrepair. And just as those roads were so important 100 years ago, and they're critical today, now you need the same in regards to telecommunications in terms of the internet.
Now, I mean, are you looking forward to taking this message to Superior and Green Bay and Platteville?
I can't think of anything that would be more fun.
Uh-huh.
I mean, really, let me keep talking about, for example, the internet and connectivity. We built a great system here in Madison when we franchised the cable network. That was taken away from us by the state. And so not only do we not have the ability to control that, but we can't build new partnerships for effective internet connectivity. And that is critical to compete not just with the rest of the country, but in terms of the world. You know, we operate at speeds at a fraction of San Francisco and other metropolitan areas. They operate at a speed that's a fraction of what's going on in Seoul, South Korea, and in Paris. And, you know, I noticed that just recently in the last year, Governor Walker is finally talking about the state playing a role in expanding access to the internet. It's critical for our economy.
We got to wrap it up. We'll have to come back and talk much more on that particular topic. Happy New Year, Paul.
Thank you.
We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. My thanks to Madison Mayor Paul Soglin and to you for joining us. Happy New Year. We'll see you next week on For the Record.